All right, August 20th, and our second episode of the CRM show within GTMN. So I'm excited about this. For those who are listening in and who heard the last episode, we've changed the format up a little bit. It's not just about weekly news and hot takes on what's happening in the world of go-to-market, but also deep dives. So we did part one of the CRM deep dive last week, and we're doing part two now. So let's jump in. We left off at an interesting point, Austin. I think roughly around 2014, 2016, we were getting into like what I would call like the last decade of sort of modern CRM. And there's no better place to start with Salesforce, again, as is the theme throughout this series, because Salesforce surprisingly was the first one to talk about AI in CRM, right? With Einstein in 2016. So I'm going to read a little piece on this. So Einstein was announced on September 19th, 2016, almost exactly a decade ago. It was shown at Dreamforce as the world's smartest CRM, predictive machine learning AI, embedded across the clouds, lead and opportunity scoring, product recommendations, automated case routing, predictive analytics. Benioff's framing was every customer's data scientist. It scored, it predicted, but it was still very much built for humans. And apparently, Salesforce built it by acquiring AI startups, Prediction.io and MetaMind in 2016. So that's the start of AI and CRM. Isn't that wild that Salesforce is the one that actually kicked it all off?
I'm trying to think, like, is it surprising or wild? Yes and no at the same time. I think like my perspective on Salesforce being the first is that there was a period of time from like 2000 maybe 5 to 2010 where Salesforce was growing, and my understanding of how well it would perform is kind of like lost to history. I mean, like at least for me, I didn't even start using Salesforce till 2011. When did you first start using Salesforce, Pranav?
We had our Salesforce implementation at this small consulting firm that I was part of in 2010. And surprisingly, I was the only techie person at that consulting firm. So I got, made in charge of doing this. So yeah, 2010, 2011 is when I wrote my first Apex code in Salesforce.
So I think like from that perspective, a lot of this history is just lost to us, right? Like, I don't know, maybe if we had been in a position where we saw the rise in the early 2000s would be not as surprising. But it's surprising to me just because I feel like, well, I guess it's not surprising to me because like I've always known Salesforce as what it is today. But you have to go back in time and realize that actually for a big portion of Salesforce's history, it actually was still a little bit of an underdog.
Yeah, very much so. So Einstein comes out in 2016. And, this is also like, I have a personal gripe with this whole AI sort of terminology, right? Like ML, AI, where do you draw the line is a little bit arbitrary. Now AI has been co-opted by like everyone doing Gen AI. And what I mean by that is generative AI and large language models, but like the field of AI existed. So it was very much there. And then, right as ChatGPT launched, I feel like nothing really changed between 2016 and 2022 or 2023, because even though Salesforce had Einstein, it seemed like a marketing ploy and not really sort of many material product changes, at least not, perceived by the users of the platform. And tell me if you disagree.
No,
but then, yeah.
We're talking about a lot of different things here, and I probably didn't make my point well enough before. I think like one is the fact that Salesforce came out with Einstein and had an AI play is not necessarily surprising from my current day perspective of Salesforce. But if you back up to the history of Salesforce that we talked about in the last episode, I would argue that Salesforce has never actually been a technology innovator. They've been a marketing innovator. So I think that was maybe the point I was trying to make before, and now that I want to dig into is this idea that like if you map some of the in-between from call it 2008 to 2016, Salesforce has built a history of acquiring companies and acquiring technology and integrating it into their own. One thing that we didn't cover as deeply, which maybe we should, is the acquisition of RelateIQ,
RelateIQ, yeah.
RelateIQ, which basically became the premise of more of the AI products. And when I think about that acquisition in particular, because I remember really specifically, I was a user of RelateIQ, and it was just like a nicer Salesforce. It was faster, it made sense, but most notably, Pranav, it connected to your inbox and it brought in your calls and your emails. And that was like the first, I would call it like, today, a must-have for any CRM, but at the time, like an advanced feature, like I can just bring in all of my information and all of my calls, and suddenly I have the ability to start acting on them. And when I think about Einstein in particular, when I was using it in 2016 to 2020, a lot of the features were just based on this very simple premise of when you have insights into the inbox and into the calendar and into, at the time there wasn't transcription, but Zoom started doing transcription around 2018, if I remember. You now have like kind of the context area to start automating tasks. I remember one of the most simple automated tasks is just like logging a call.
Yep.
And so this is a very long-winded way of saying, I think Einstein has always been a little bit of a marketing play and not a technology play. The fact that they were first to market, in my mind, actually represents the genius of their marketing ability and not necessarily a technology play. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about like what actually was Einstein and how did those features develop over time? Because I can't remember a single instance where I found it to be like super useful. And I'm kind of curious if you've had a different experience.
No, exactly the same, right? It was like I was saying, it was very much a marketing ploy, and it didn't really change how people were using the product. I'm pretty sure everybody in the Salesforce admin land was pitched it, and they were maybe doing some things around scoring and routing and automation, like you said, like workflows, which you would have done sort of more deterministically. Maybe you were now leveraging some of the scoring that Einstein was doing to help you, but it wasn't obviously sort of anywhere close to what's possible today. And most enterprise deployments were also just very, very broken, right? There are still companies out there today that are running on a 2015 version of Salesforce. What do I mean by this, right? Like, it's just, if you are a large established player, you're not ripping apart your Salesforce instance and then rebuilding it with all these new AI features. You're still stuck in the past. And so the end user experience for the sales reps, for Salesforce admins was still pretty bad. So I completely agree with you. But again, like, Benioff is a genius when it comes to like marketing. The fact that he called it Einstein, the fact that he was talking about data science and AI affecting CRM a decade ago does say something, right? So there's,
I want to be fair too, because look, I remember helping implement Salesforce at the first company I worked for. And I remember helping manage Salesforce at the second company I worked for. And I remember seeing many advanced implementations of Salesforce as I consulted over the last decade. But there have to have been particularly a large number of customers who were successful with Einstein during these years. The problem that I find when I've like interviewed the market and as I went down the rabbit hole building, my own CRM business, is that often people just think of it as vaporware because of the delta between kind of promise and expectation and reality. And so much of that has to do with the fact that these are very custom implementations. I mean, Salesforce at the end of the day has always been a database with a wrapper around it. And when you have, they do have structured objects, which make things easier, but everybody adds their own attributes and has their own case routing. And like you said before, like in the earliest days of you using Salesforce, you're writing code to basically wire up Salesforce to match the business. And I think that is some of both the problem and the story of Einstein and other parts of Salesforce, is that it's always been a database with a lot of custom software on top because everybody's business is slightly different. And as I think about kind of the AI era and what has changed with GPT and Agentforce and others, it's actually saying, oh, we actually now have a solution to this chaotic, unpredictable, and unorganized kind of set of customers who all have different needs and all have different styles and have different attributes. While the core primitives of the database are the same, everybody's database is different. And actually, AI is very, very good at kind of creating frameworks and regularity out of a bunch of what I'd call non-deterministic outcomes,
what's really interesting to me is I'm thinking about sort of why this might have happened at actually both Salesforce and HubSpot. Mm-hmm. By the way, I didn't realize this until 2 or 3 years ago, that Salesforce's support product is bigger than its CRM product. I don't know if you knew this, by revenue. Mm-hmm. So yeah, what is it called? Customer Cloud or Support Cloud, whatever it is, right? Like that business is bigger than Sales Cloud. So you have I think, and then if you think about HubSpot as well, right? They started in the marketing domain and then they added CRM and then they added like commerce and payments. Same thing for Salesforce. They added commerce, they added support cloud. And I wonder if they had just stayed true to sales, whether they actually would have been able to innovate and not get distracted by all the other sort of line extensions that they were doing and just focus on the core sales experience, because I don't think that they made as much progress between 2015 and 2025. Now, I want to just come back very quickly to HubSpot, because if you think about sort of, what HubSpot has done, or actually, so let's talk about like what happened after ChatGPT, right? So 2022, ChatGPT is announced, and then within about 3 months, Salesforce announces Einstein GPT. This is an OpenAI integration, generative content, and then you have Einstein Copilot that drafts emails, suggests next steps, and it's like the first, generative AI for CRM. And then you have, this is March 7 of 2023, and then you have Agentforce that launches September of 2024. And this is where there is like multi-step execution with guardrails, and then this is all like, triggered by data changes or system events rather than just a human prompt. So that's happening in the CRM world. And then HubSpot similarly launches this whole Breeze thing. I've not been a user of it, but like, this is the same sort of thing of like per outcome-based pricing and essentially giving you a whole bunch of like AI features within HubSpot. So both of them, like, they're not sitting around, they're doing something, but I just think that it was too late because the market had suddenly just opened up, and we'll get into like what that means. And obviously you had a front row seat to what was going on in 22 and 23, but like, what's your observation? Because let's talk about that, right? Like, how did you all decide to jump into this category in 22, 23, 24 when you did? Like, what was your thesis?
So, I saw parts of the 2023 GPT feature, and, early GPT was creating text and classifying text. It was like a very good text classifier. And ChatGPT was also, I think at the time, thought of as a text classification system. The thing that I don't think I fully saw or anybody else saw was how AI was going to be so good at programming, at coding. I'll give you an example. When I originally wanted to start building a CRM business back in 2018. And at the time, it was actually a very simple model, a very simple idea. Like RelateIQ, Salesforce was old and stodgy and hard to use, and it took a long time to load, which then made people inefficient. It had a marketplace of integrations that were hard to integrate. It required a whole coding language that was hard to use and that people didn't want to use. And so the idea was actually simple. Why not just try to build a better tool that was based on technology that was much newer? So very similar to every kind of business play that exists, take something that already exists and make it better with newer tools and newer technology. And I think as GPT started to come out, it was clear to me that text classification would play a primary role in what the CRM would be. As an example of that, what do sellers do? I actually remember talking to you when we originally started thinking of building a product, and you're like, I have all these calls that I go through, and I have a checklist I go through, and I log these as tasks, and I log a note to them. And at the same time, as all this was happening, what we haven't talked about is the rise of transcription services and the rise of call recordings, which I think actually came about before GPT and came out before AI, but certainly accelerated when AI happened. And so, what you start to see is GPT can be very, very good at classifying tasks, at classifying follow-ups, at classifying emails, at adding notes to an opportunity value. So all of a sudden, the idea is an AI rep who normally is spending some large fraction of their time logging data inside the CRM so that the leadership team has visibility into where the business is going, all that work can be automated because AI can read things and then act on them. And then I think what changed though, because in my mind, I was always thinking to myself, well, if you built a newer tool with modern APIs and a better programming language and a set of SDKs, you'll bring developers who will want to build on it. What I never predicted, and what I think has really come true, is that argument didn't matter at all. And the reason why it didn't matter at all is because AI is very, very good at reading docs and basically creating any amount of coding language that you want based on those. So the idea that, hey, Apex is tough and hard to read and nobody wants to program in it, it doesn't actually matter at all anymore. And so I think that was actually like a core thesis in the CRM category that has totally changed. We predicted, at least I predicted, people are not going to want to use Apex. It's an old, stodgy, dying language. People don't like being known for being Apex developers, even though there's a whole community and there's a lot of money in it. That's separate from liking something. But what I didn't see is, AI will actually be really, really good at writing Apex code. And actually, Salesforce doesn't really need to change much about its legacy infrastructure because AI can write against its legacy infrastructure. And actually, the whole ecosystem of consultants and people who are Salesforce experts are only going to become more powerful because previously, if you wanted to do stuff with custom code, you'd have to have some level of technical fluency. Now, if you understand the objects and you understand how to administrate Salesforce, you can use AI to do almost anything inside Salesforce. So what I think has happened, what I didn't predict, and I think has really changed the CRM game, is that the disadvantage that all these companies had by being custom software and having an old legacy software language, in my mind, doesn't matter as much. It didn't come true in the way that I expect. And so instead, you're just left with what is really the main difference between a tool like Salesforce and a tool like Attio or a tool like Monaco? And yes, there are APIs. Yes, there's cost. Yes, there's ease of use. But many of those things are surmountable. I actually think that the biggest thing that still hinders Salesforce is just ease of use and UI.
Yeah.
The most common complaint I hear from rev operators is it's just so slow. It's hard to use. I can't find things.
Totally.
But you imagine that might not matter anymore. They might, Salesforce is becoming headless. And so when you have a headless machine, it doesn't really matter if you load the UI, and latency doesn't matter anymore.
There's a lot to unpack in what you're saying, and I hadn't thought about this while preparing for this episode, but let's talk about, okay, so this is happening in 22, 23. I'm sure there's a whole sort of set of drama that's happening internally within Salesforce and HubSpot. And then you have, obviously you all started Clarify, and then you mentioned a few names, right? You mentioned Attio, there is Lightfield, there is Monaco, there's, some people might go as far as calling Clay a CRM. I don't know, maybe. And so all of these new tools that are emerging, much better UI, much more slick, much faster, and they all have a little chatbot within them that's helping you take action. Do you think that any of these can really compete with Salesforce and HubSpot, or do you think that this is going to be very, very hard for these upstarts?
Well, they are, right? And look, Rome wasn't built overnight. So I think, I think what's interesting is just to consider more what is happening in the CRM ecosystem. And the answer is there's just more competition than I think Salesforce has ever really had before. A CRM is just a database. So again, maybe this is me being a little bit of marketing talk here, but a CRM is just a database. And it has workflows and has other things built on top. But people have successfully used Notion as databases. People have successfully used their own CRMs as databases. I'm having conversations with people all the time about build or buy. Do I build a tool? Do I buy a CRM and then build around it? The reality is that there's a lot of new businesses starting every week. There are a lot of businesses who are being priced out from tools like HubSpot and Salesforce. There are a lot of businesses who want to be AI native. Let's put aside what that actually means for a second and just consider that much like how Salesforce marketed their way to success, many of the existing current CRM AI businesses are marketing their way to success. From a technology perspective, it's all the same, right? It's if you have a CRM that is a database with access to APIs and MCPs, you can manage that in any way you want. The reality, though, is that a lot of people are still actually logging into their CRM. They're actually clicking buttons. They actually want the experience inside that CRM to look and feel great. And then most notably, I think there's becoming an interesting story I'm seeing among some companies like Revo, where the CRM is actually a launch pad to something more. What if your CRM actually helped you grow your business? So this is an interesting thing that we've talked about a bit, which is for a founder, the outcome of a CRM is actually pretty clear. You take your calls, you build your follow-ups, you prep for meetings. The goal of a single-player CRM is to help the founder or the business owner get their time back and to kind of most efficiently capture revenue. But then there's this other part of the CRM that's not talked about, which is the interface with product. So often, product managers and product leaders use the CRM as a way to distill insights from customer calls to understand what to build. And many companies have tried to build this for what it's worth. For example, like Reforge tried to build a product around this. Miro product, there are lots of product teams have tried to build this interesting interface between customer prospect and existing customer calls and the actions and activities that will drive that business outcome and link that to a revenue generating activity. And before you'd think it's impossible, right? How could a tool like Salesforce help you generate new business, right? But if you're a software business, it actually makes a lot of sense. You're on a call with a customer. They say they want to sign for Paramark, but they need these 3 things. And out of the 3 things, 2 of them are well documented or not. How can you actually have an agent or a surface area be able to listen to those calls and automatically start building? There's also a version of this world where, I mean, that's like the software VC business model. But imagine you own a local franchise and you track customer insights and you're able to turn that into actual activities. A very common one I think about all the time is like hotels don't always have dedicated CRMs about every customer that visits a hotel. They have some type of CRM, whether it's Salesforce, a customer implementation, or third-party software. But what if you could start listening to the conversations that the front desk has with customers and picking up on details about the things that they need so that the next time it actually does them automatically? What if the email conversations that you have with the reservation desk actually propagate to some type of on-site system that alert the bellman about the changes that need to be made to the reservation? So like there are tons of examples where the CRM can actually be revenue generating. And right. I think like right now, all of the native AI native kind of AI created startups are really focused on 1, making a better UI, and 2, trying to build the experience that you actually see in the UI with having AI. But I think there's this whole emergent category that hasn't been explored yet of what do you do after those problems are solved? Right. And I don't know if there's space for 5 or 10 of these AI companies, but I certainly think that, depending on your outcome, if you're trying to build a $1 billion, $2 billion company, you're thinking more about how you can become revenue generating. And we've talked about this before, I think in one of our podcasts, where the trouble of the CDP market was that it was never revenue generating. It was always cost controlling. And cost controlling businesses, especially in marketing and sales, are just like really hard businesses to scale to $1 billion. So right. You have to figure out a way not just to help the customer save money, but how to help them generate money.
I love this. And so if the lesson to take away for both, buyers of CRM and also maybe the sellers of CRM is to move from this system of record idea to a system of action and then system of growth, rather than just like, hey, here's a database and a wrapper and an AI agent that sits on top of it. Like, how are you actually driving growth becomes the thing. And if you can crack that, then you have a much better shot at displacing the Salesforces and the HubSpots of the world, which makes a ton of sense to me. Okay, I want to talk about pricing a little bit, right? So all of these companies are also kind of at the bleeding edge of like figuring out how all this works. There was seat-based pricing. That was like the most, prevalent way that CRMs would price themselves. And Salesforce has 3 different models running right now, apparently. There's a per conversation model, there's a seat-based model, and there's a action-based model. So like 3 different price points. I don't know if they've like rationalized it and simplified it or not. And then HubSpot, okay, this one is kind of crazy. They had this like 50 cents per resolved conversation. This went live in like April of 2026, or $1 per qualified read. And so you only pay when it works. And right after that change, they had a 19% drop in their stock price on May 8th, even though they had a great quarter. So like this pricing is like completely, being disrupted right now. And I'm curious what your take is. Like, what do you think is good pricing? Like, how did you think about it at Clarify when you were there?
So, I thought about it at Clarify. I've also talked to a lot of founders about this, even, within the KV portfolio and then just like, from the folks that I advise. And I think that the challenge with variable-based pricing is always that CFOs don't like to be surprised. Mm-hmm. You can kind of look on LinkedIn right now and you'll see a lot of founder tweets about, hey, like I looked into our AI token pricing in April and here's what I found. And it's always like some story of, wow, it was really crazy. It was a huge number. And now I have to go like reel in spending. Ramp right now just released this concept called Router, which is a new product that allows you to control token spend by routing the prompt request to the optimal model. So like they're basically taking a thin amount of the price to route it to the optimal API key for you. So I think the idea is, variable pricing works really well when the variable pricing directly leads to revenue. Hey, you're going to pay me $2 for every $3 generated. That's basically Google's pricing model. If you figured it out how to do it, like you can put $2 in and get $3 out. That's why everybody keeps paying Google and they're not going anywhere. But for costs, that's a different story. Like you're saying, hey, I can pay you for an outcome, but I can't predict in advance how many outcomes you'll have. And so your bill may be something great, or it may be something really surprising and scary. And I think also the challenge with customer service is, again, it's a cost-cutting business model. When you think about the original premise of Salesforce's business model, they said, oh, hey, for every resolved customer case, it will be X dollars. Well, you have to think like all they're doing is basically reducing headcount. So the maximum amount that this business could save is equal to the amount that they're spending on headcount. And since it probably will never be zero, maybe, the long-term argument is we'll never pay you as much as what it cost us to have the headcount. So like say you're an organization buying Salesforce and you have 2,000 support folks and it costs you, or maybe we'll do a smaller number. You have 10 support costs and it costs you, I don't know, $2 million a year to have those 10, support. You're never going to pay Salesforce more than $2 million. But based on the pricing is, if you have 1 million kind of handled requests, you could easily break through what you're paying your headcount to do. So I think that is like the fundamental challenge of variable outcome-based pricing. And so one thing that I thought a lot about at Clarify and that I kind of challenge others to write about. And by the way, I wrote actually a lot of my AI pricing thoughts in a Substack article recently.
Nice. It's
on the Growth Stack Mafia. But I think the first one is that if you're going to charge for outcomes, the outcomes need to be widely understood. Like, what is the outcome? And secondly, you may, very much similar to CDP, you may want to lock in floors and ceilings so that people aren't surprised. Another strategy is also considering a maximal number of outcomes derived if you use your own API key, which again is, maybe not what people want. They want to collect the arbitrage on top of the API token. But ultimately, if you're trying to maximize kind of variable pricing, what you do is you say, look, for every conversation, it's just this small amount up to some tier or some limit. And if you use your own API key, it'll be reduced by 20% or 30% or whatever it is. You're basically saying, hey, you can control how much you use API keys. And in some cases, I see some businesses allowing them to enter multiple model keys. So not only can you control the outcome, you can control the quality of the outcome. You can actually control whether it's GPT, Sonnet, Quinn, whatever model you want. And I think that's just going to increasingly happen, by the way. I think more CTOs and procurement experts are going to say, look, we want to bring our own model. Like, yes, maybe the model you're using for internal resolution is the same, but for the one that is speaking our language and performing the activities in action, we don't really want to be paying you a premium literally on top of OpenAI's business model. Or we'll just go build this software ourselves because guess what? AI is really, really good at programming and it can probably build a lightweight model to do this for us. So yeah, I think that's the challenge. And one thing we didn't really talk about, but that's important, is differentiating between an outcome and something like a workflow. So I see this idea of an outcome or AI kind of evolving. There's AI in the conversation, and there's the idea of the conversation outcome, which is like really true to CX. There's AI and automation in an automated workflow. For example, on HubSpot, if you have a workflow, and Salesforce, you have a workflow. And then there's AI and automation that's like native inside the tool itself. Mm-hmm. And I think the start of this conversation was all about the CX use case, the Fin use case, right? And I think in that business model, what they're really doing is they're trying to probably build their own closed weighted model system that answers support ticket requests and has an ability to like read docs and answer requests better than everybody else.
But even on the CRM side, right? I'll give you my example. Like we use Clarify, and I'm actually doing a lot of sort of automation within Clarify where I have these agents that I'm coding up for like very small things like, hey, whenever you notice I made a commitment to a customer on a call, log it into my linear as a task or what have you, right? Or ping me on Slack or what have you. And so I do think that I'm willing to pay on a per task basis because the alternative to that is either building some like custom agent within Claude or me like doing it by hand. So there is value. And the question is, like you said, how do you make it predictable? And how do you not make it like, you have your token cost is going through the roof. So I think there's going to be an interesting sort of right sizing of these things because you also like, I'm thoughtful in what I'm doing within the CRM, but like if you have a Salesforce of 1,000 people and everyone's creating custom agents and now suddenly you have like the wild, wild west and your costs are ballooning up, even though most of the output is not being used, right? So it's like the thoughtfulness is the hard part. Okay. I want to sort of maybe bring this to close a little bit by looking at some of the competitive ecosystem right now, right? So we mentioned the names Attio, Lightfield, Monaco, Clarify. I just came across another one called Clearskies. This hit my feed yesterday. This is from the team that was building Scratchpad on top of Salesforce. I don't know if you know Poya and team. And they pivoted a little bit and launched this thing called Clearskies. So it's clearskies.cc. And what they're doing is they're calling it the context layer for revenue AI. And so connect your CRM, calls, email, calendar, Slack, plus how your business runs. And Clearskies resolves it into one context layer that can work within Claude, within ChatGPT, and any other tool. So all of your workflows and revenue sort of plays start from that sort of full picture, which is an interesting take, right? They're coming at it from I'll create the best harness for you rather than compete in the CRM layer. So I'm intrigued, what is your current thinking? Obviously you're biased given you started Clarify, but what's your take on, who do you see sort of pushing ahead versus not? Or do you think it's anybody's game to win right now?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, so one observation I've had about all of AI native CRMs is all of them are pushing the idea of uploading skills into the AI system. And I think that, what does this remind me of? It's kind of like the same problem of the CDP, which is where should these integrations live? If they live everywhere, they're kind of useless to everyone. So I actually think that the having skills and having agents that run those skills and talk to systems, every AI native solution out there right now is building a way for you to have an agent inside of their solution to run skills and automations inside of their solution. And I think that works really, really well for small and medium-sized businesses. I think it works terribly for enterprise. Everything I know about enterprise is that you have a dozen or 15 different connected tools, and they're all talking to one another with data. And if you use the native or inbound automations and connectors inside those tools, you create what I like to call systems hell, which is where tools are connected to one another in a way that are not easy to diagnose. And so you can never actually figure out where the source of a problem is coming from. And this is a very well documented problem in a lot of legacy enterprise solution systems where you actually want to take a very disparate, well-connected set of solutions and minimize the connections they have, get everything into the warehouse, and run your automations from one place. That was the whole premise of an iPaaS tool, for what it's worth, is you have all of your, all of your modification systems, all of your editing and CRUDing is all in one system and tool. So basically you kind of minimize sprawl of automations across the different third-party tools. A really good example would be at Ramp. I remember this happened. We trying to debug some opportunity issue, and it was, here was the chain. It was there was a segment event that got sent to segment, and then that hit on our back end, custom piece of Python software, changed something in HubSpot, which then went into a workflow. That workflow changed a contact attribute on a Salesforce record via a two-way sync. That then fired an opportunity record creation. So when something happens, how the do you actually find out where in that chain is the problem? And that really highlights, I think, the challenge for a lot of AI native CRM businesses. Everybody wants people to use AI inside their tool and solution to get more value. That's only really valuable, I think, for small, medium-sized players where they don't have a really disparate and super connected stack.
You still give me a mini panic attack, right? I think about this with our go-to-market engineer all the time. Is if you don't document all the different workflows, there is no AI for that, right? There's still a human being who's doing the documentation. Maybe there is.
Yeah, Here's a hypothesis, though. It's as long as the tools you're using have an API and have a platform API where you can read the integrations that are lined up, you actually could be in a world where it doesn't really matter whether you use an integration in Clay or in Clarify or Attio or Zapier. If it can read the platform and understand the connections, it can basically build a mental map of how everything is connected. The challenge, though, is that not every tool has that, and most people don't know how tools are connected. And So that's part of the problem. And in my mind, I think the easier solution as you grow as a business is just to say, let's stop using native integrations inside these tools and centralize to one place where it has the API access to take action in any of the other tools. Not to mention, again, I'm sure in Clarify, I'm sure in Clay, I'm sure in Zapier, you're paying a premium on what the cost would be to just DIY. It might be a very small premium. It might be 10, 20, 30%, but you're in any kind of third-party piece of software right now that's using using AI, they're not giving you the token costs at value. You're paying a premium to basically make an API request through a third party to OpenAI or Claude. And so again, this is cost shouldn't be the driver, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. But if you're a startup that's growing fast, you will quickly find yourself in this position where, as the tools scale and as your system scales, it makes a lot more sense to actually centralize the workflows you have into a single solution. That could be something like Clay, that could be something like Attio, that could be something like Revo, or it could be, hey, we have our own custom software that's going to go reach out to these APIs and take action on our behalf. And that workflow is kind of managed at cost for us on the token side.
Okay, so I want to bring it to a close because I do have to jump in the next 4 minutes, but two things that might be interesting to talk about. One is breaking news from yesterday. I think it was yesterday or this morning that Benioff announced a new thing in Slack called Slack Code. And this is effectively, they've partnered with Anthropic, with OpenAI, with Cognition, with all these other sort of coding platforms to offer coding agents within Slack. So back to your point about, if it's completely headless and you've already got all this infrastructure and you can write code using all these modern sort of, coding agents within Slack, is that sort of the way for Salesforce to continue to maintain their lead? I don't know if it'll work, if people will use it, but I thought this was a very fascinating announcement. And yeah, and he's also, I don't know if he's joked about it, but have you heard of SlackForce? Have you heard about his pitch to rebrand the company SlackForce?
Yeah, I mean, Pranav, I don't think it's crazy. And I don't know if this is well articulated in the marketing vision. And this is actually an area where I don't know if this is marketing fluff. I think this is real technological value. I have worked with many companies, including one recently, Replit, where they built think of it like a God mode app that has access to all tools and systems and can basically do anything you want in the company. As long as the agent has been given the tool, meaning the MCP, or the API key, it can do anything. And so you can interact with it through Slack. Stripe has this, Ramp has talked about this. We had one at Replit. Everybody is building everybody in Silicon Valley, I would say, is building this idea of the mega repo or the mega app, the mega agent, where as an example for a business that you're serving, it's like they have access to Google Ads, they have access to Meta Ads, they have access to your CDP, they have access to your Salesforce. And depending on how much you trust them and how you build them, they can both pull data and run analyses, and they can also write PRs to change parts of your website and backend infrastructure. So you can imagine that Slack may build an integration with GitHub where you authorize the agent to take action and write PRs on your application or any set of applications. You also give it development and test keys to all of your applications. And you basically built, a super agent that can act as an employee. You could provision these agents. You could give them personalities. And so again, Salesforce is coming at it from the perspective of, hey, you have all this customer data in the same place. Slack is a place to do work. Now we're actually I think they're building what we talked about in the beginning, this vision of a CRM that can help you generate revenue, because now you could talk in Slack about a conversation and then kick off a PR that might be guided by customer conversations. I think Revo is doing that by the way. I think they're seeing that vision and trying to build from scratch towards that. I don't know if all the AI native companies are thinking about that. I think Salesforce is uniquely positioned to tackle this though because of Slack, and Slack being a productivity tool and not just a CRM tool.
So, okay, Austin, this has been fantastic. We're going to wrap at this point, but I have a really exciting guest that might be interested in coming on the show in the next week or two. So I'm going to leave it as a cliffhanger. We'll talk about it async.
Oh, nice.
And tune in to the next episode to find out who this is. But this is somebody who's smack at the center of AI, has seen a ton at both Salesforce and HubSpot. So it'll be a fun conversation.
It's not Mark, is it?
No. That would be a good one. Maybe he'll listen to this and come join us. All right, fantastic. Austin, I'll see you in another week or so, and we'll record the third part of the series. And until then, have fun, you all.